This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 10 is the time, and a very good morning indeed to you. There are quite a few strange stories around today, but they do speak to a similar theme. And it is about the way in which the country's brains have been boiled by immigration. There's a story that we may move on to a little later about a cleaner, an office cleaner, who is taking legal action against a top city law firm after being fired for eating a leftover tuna sandwich from a discarded platter. So her job would have involved cleaning up after some lawyers had their lunch, and she ate a tuna sandwich. There's a Daily Mail columnist today who uses this as an opportunity to rant about immigration and to claim that the job of cleaning up the sandwiches of the lawyers should be done by some British person who is currently, some mythical British person who is currently sitting at home twiddling their thumbs. I told you that the relatively tiny number of unemployed people, willfully unemployed people, would be the next massive, and not because it takes any particular insight to predict it, but because they kind of shot their bolt on Brussels, which got the blame for everything that the Tories were responsible for years. And now if you're writing a column for the Daily Mail and some poor woman is being treated like a sort of 19th century housemaid, then you see that as an opportunity really to attack her. And, well, you're at it, to attack a mythical British person who is currently between jobs or out of work. It's extraordinary. But that's not the story that is going to detain us first. Nor is this. A scheme allowing Ukrainians to join family members who have already taken sanctuary in the UK has been unexpectedly closed. It's called the Ukraine Family Scheme. There's some dispute over just how sweeping a move this is, but opposition politicians have described it as cruel and below the radar, just days before the second anniversary of Russia's full invasion of Ukraine. It means, said one lawyer who follows these matters, that people in the UK with vulnerable and disabled family members may be left with no way to bring them to safety. And I read that story last night in the same moment that I read about James Cleverly, or I saw James Cleverly boasting about telling overseas care workers that they too will no longer be able to bring family members to this country, including, one has to presume, and I do believe to be the case, including their children. Yes, dependents. I mean, it is literally their children. And indeed, at the same time, anyone wanting to move family members with them to the UK, the minimum income requirement is being raised to £38,700. So that would include spouses. So it's a ban on care workers bringing dependents with them to the UK, and you need to be earning just shy of 40 grand a year if you want to bring your husband or your wife. Today in Parliament, James Cleverly wrote, "We have laid an order to ban overseas care workers from bringing dependents. This is just one part of our plan to deliver the biggest ever cut in migration." I think he also managed to spell dependent wrong, which I'm so old-fashioned that to me seems to be pretty poor, really, in the great scheme of things. A Home Secretary can't spell dependent. You presume that he has oversight of these things before they get sent out. But let's not get distracted by that. I never use this phrase. Even when I was writing How They Broke Britain, I don't really use this phrase because I think it's lazy and I think it's often used by idiots. But even a stopped clock is right twice a day. This makes me feel ashamed to be British. You are casting your net from a sector that is crying out for staff. You're casting it all around the world, in competition, of course, with other countries where demographics demand an influx of labour because they are an ageing population. And, of course, the demographics of an ageing population increases the need for people to look after the members of the ageing demographic. So you're casting your net around the world, trying to tempt people to come to your country to look after your elderly and your sick and your vulnerable. And you are telling them, you can come and care. Just think about this, please. You can come and care for my family, but you won't be allowed to care for your own. You'll have to leave your children in India or in the Philippines is a very popular source of staff in these sectors, increasingly after they banned freedom of movement, of course, for people from the European Union. I don't know if you've ever heard me issue that phrase, except slightly in jest, you know. It makes me feel ashamed to be British. I won't do the usual mispronunciation of Rabbie Burns. I'll do my best to correctly remember. Won't some gift the gifty gears to see ourselves as others see us? I got it wrong again, didn't I? It's a real mental block for me, that, considering it's one of my favourite lines. I think you can spell dependent in either with an E or with an A, but I've got a feeling the A is the American leaning. But that Robert Burns line is about the power you would have for self-improvement, how wonderful it would be in your mission to be a better person, how wonderful it would be if you could truly see yourself as others see you. How wonderful would that be? If you could truly see, particularly if you're in a position of power or authority, because quite often the people around you are aware of the fact that status kind of creates a scenario in which they have to laugh at your jokes or they have to bend the proverbial knee. You're working in a care home. You're unlikely, in a country that's not your country of birth, you're unlikely to kick off too unduly, aren't you, about the circumstances. But goodness me, to see ourselves as others see us. And that is what we have become, apparently. And it's the boast about it that I find. I think I've understood it, by the way. I think I understand completely why these two stories have appeared at the same time. I think that what you would call the gross numbers, 672,000 more people entered the UK than left it in the 12 months to June, making a complete mockery of all the racist reasons given to you to vote for Brexit. I mean, that really was all that was left, wasn't it? After the economic impacts were measured, after the freedom of movement was abolished, after the claim that it would actually make trade easier was completely destroyed. Unbelievable, really, to reflect upon the fact that the Home Secretary is now boasting about not letting people bring their children here, Now, we're very privileged in this country. We're very blessed. It is unlikely that your economic situation would ever demand that you cross continents or leave the country to work. And if you did, you would probably be the dad. You know, the building trade in the 1980s saw an awful lot of people from this country go and work in Germany because they were enjoying a building boom and we were quite often in recession. It immortalised, of course, in the classic television comedy for people of my vintage, which you were sometimes allowed to stay up late to watch, Auf Wiedersehen Pet. So that's usually dads. Irish families of Irish extraction will be similarly familiar with the practice of dad coming over to Great Britain to work on the roads or to work on building sites and to go home, some perhaps at weekends, sometimes monthly, sometimes less. Puts enormous strain on families. But what the care sector relies upon is largely female staff. And what they are more likely to be than men is a mum. And James Cleverly is asking you to celebrate an instruction to those mums that if they want to come here and look after your mum, they'll have to leave their children behind. Do you know, this one's really got me. It's really got me, this one. I don't know why. There's terrible stuff happening all the time, isn't there? Terrible, terrible stuff being done in by government, lies and appalling provocations and disgusting culture wars. But this one really gets me. I'll tell you why it really gets me, because it's not. This is when culture war actually meets reality. This is when James Cleverly's conviction that what you want to hear is a promise from this government that foreign people are going to have their lives rendered less pleasant, even though they are the sort of foreign people that you're supposed to welcome, the ones that are coming here to wipe your grandma's backside. He thinks your votes can be won by telling you about how they're going to make that person's life less pleasant. And listen, no one is ever forced to take up one of these visas, these, what did we call it, liberty of motion visas. Practice so many sectors now being forced to issue visas, apply for visas to bring staff here from overseas, just like I told you would happen when they abolished freedom of movement. They'll have to bring it back just under a different name, and with, of course, the crucial difference that it doesn't apply to you anymore. You can't go, your children can't travel across the whole of Europe, taking up work and falling in love wherever they may please. But increasingly, we will have to essentially beg people to come here. But we're not there yet. We're still at the point where we're going, well, yeah, we want you to come here, but you must understand you'll be a second-class citizen. That's what this is. I think that's a fairly neat description of racism, isn't it? You can come here, you can work here, you can look after, you can issue my granddad's medications, you can wipe my mum's bottom, you can care for people that we are incapable of drawing people into the family, incapable of drawing people from the population, the indigenous population, into this profession, largely because the wages are so low and the work is so hard. People born into less blessed parts of the world will jump at the opportunity to come here and do it for us and do it instead. But we don't want them to enjoy their lives too much. We don't want them to bring their children with them. Good God, you're coming to look after my mum. You can leave your own bloody kids behind, says James Cleverly. And this one to me feels different from a lot of the other stuff. This one to me feels colder. It feels grimmer. It feels nasty. Barely worth the breath of pointing out to you that the Tories used to parade themselves as the party of family values, or indeed to wonder what this new breed of weirdos who are always talking about nuclear families and how mum should stay at home and not go to work, I bet that with their weird little conferences and their weird little titles, I presume they'll all be queuing up to condemn this, because it drives a coach and horses through the importance of family life, unless, of course, they think that foreigners... Well, I didn't mean you when I talked about the importance of family life. You're a Filipina. You can leave your flipping kids behind in Manila. You're coming here to look after my family. You're coming here to look after my mum so that I don't have to. I can stick her in a home. You can look after her, and I don't care who's looking after your children back in the Philippines. It's an extraordinary policy, isn't it? Isn't it? Or am I missing something? 0345 6060 973 kicks in on March the 11th. Even if there was a rationale for it, it's not something that you'd boast about, is it? You know, when you deliver bad news to somebody, you're supposed to do it regretfully. You're supposed to do it with a sense of sorrow. I'm so grateful to you for coming here to care for our elderly when we are unable to fill these vacancies with people who were born here. Thank you so much. And because of significant strains upon our public services, you can't bring your family with you. You can't bring your little boy with you. You can't bring your baby girl with you. You can't bring your family with you. You can't bring your children with you. You're coming to look after our family on the condition that you leave your own family behind. It's extraordinary, isn't it? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. And the point, of course, to make is that there are only two reasons to have done this. Even the numbers are high enough for it to matter. So either the numbers of people coming here to work in our care homes who want to bring dependents with them, either that number is sufficiently high for this to be meaningful policy, for this to take a proper chunk out of the overall numbers, despite the fact that even Idiot's Corner has never been populated with people complaining about care workers having children. Either there is a significant enough number of people in this position to make a dent in the overall numbers, in which case it's horrible and it's cynical, but it at least has a patina of rationality to it, or it's not, or there aren't enough people. There are not a significant number of people in this category, in which case, in many ways, it is less impactful upon human beings, but even more horrible in terms of what it says about our country. Because it means that James Cleverly doesn't even know how many people are going to be affected by this, but he is betting the house on you cheering it to the rafters, because that Filipino woman over there is going to have to leave, that mythical care home worker over there is going to have to leave her children behind. So there it is. If it's a meaningful number of people, it's going to deter them from coming here and create even bigger problems for the care sector. And if it's not a meaningful number of people, it's a disgusting policy designed almost exclusively to delight people who revel in the idea of foreigners having their lives rendered even more second class than they were already. Let's have a quick look in Idiot's Corner just to see what is there. It's not a lot, actually. And I think March the 11th, there's a couple of you are pointing out, it's the day after Mother's Day. Good old James Cleverly, eh? What's that you're doing to mark Mother's Day? Banning mothers from bringing their children to this country. Here you go. Sarah writes, for goodness sake, only people without children will probably apply. Then why introduce the policy? Brains. Honestly, it's their choice. Nobody is being fixed in the meantime. Where are we going to house these new people coming in? So there you go. It's designed to appeal to Sarah, this, who doesn't think it will actually affect anybody, but is also very worried about all the people who won't be coming here to work where they will live. It's designed to appeal to either the brain dead or the vicious or both. And I've spent some time lately trying to be a little bit more... I don't know whether I'm going to carry on, actually, because I'm just preparing for the possibility of Labour government and the necessity of holding whoever is in power next to the same level of account that we've been holding the last shower. But they won't. They can't be as awful as this. So I usually now at this point say, could I be wrong? I just haven't got this wrong. This is disgusting. This is stone cold disgusting. It's designed either to fix a problem that doesn't exist and appeal to the very, very worst of us, or it's designed to tell people, come and look after my family, but leave your family hundreds and hundreds of miles away. And yes, it makes me ashamed to be British.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:24. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Last year, the King's Fund calculated that the care sector vacancy rate decreased from 164,000 in 2021-22 to 152,000 in 2022-23. This was as a direct result of 70,000 care workers coming to the UK. 70,000 new care workers coming to the UK, up from 20,000 the previous year, all of whom, as I understand it, will need a special visa because we've made coming into this country much, much harder than it was before Brexit. And then miraculously, 672,000 more people came in than left. But this Cleverly policy is I cannot see any positive analysis of it, because if there are a lot of people who will be affected, it's disgusting because it will affect them. And if there aren't a lot of people who will be affected, it's disgusting because he's essentially boasting about his intention to hurt them. Andrew's in Keighley. Andrew, what would you like to say?
Yeah, good morning, James. A long-time listener, first-time caller, so I'm a little bit nervous.
Well, it's only me. It's only me. Welcome aboard.
Yeah, somebody who's worked in care now for over 16 years.
Oh, yeah.
This has made my blood boil this morning.
Has it?
I'm actually really angry. When you say, will it affect a lot of people, it will affect a hell of a lot of people. You know, I've just worked in the same job. I'm in between jobs at the moment.
Okay.
And on a night shift at certain times, you can literally have nearly everyone who's from another country. And they are bloody hard workers, pardon my language.
That's all right.
You know, and it's really made me angry this morning. Angry.
I mean, I can't see the sense in it, really, apart from this, this claim that it's going to bring down the overall numbers. But it's as if they're so determined to bring down the overall numbers, they're going after foreign workers that nobody has a problem with and making life harder for them. So the bit here, just the basic maths of it, Andrew, and I sense you may not be able to help me with this because you share my sense of sort of spluttering incomprehension. There's 150,000 vacancies in your sector, right? And this is going to make it harder to tempt people to come here.
He calls himself cleverly. There's nothing clever about this.
To be fair, that's his given name. That's the name he was born with. It's not something that he's not appointed himself as James Cleverly.
But I just cannot see anything how this is. I've worked with people who are trained doctors, anaesthetists, and they come over here and they work as healthcare assistants. They do all the jobs. They wipe the bottoms, and they are so hard working. They're so nicest people you meet. And I've had people in the next few days who are literally in tears now saying, how can I, I'm having to go back to my own country now. I love it over here. And I just do not understand this. And it's maybe the stage where I said I had to ring this morning because...
I can tell from your voice that the conversation is already being held in the areas that will be affected. Kicks in on March the 11th, the day after Mother's Day. Yeah,
which is, again, it's just bizarre. And, with the greatest respect, and I don't want to, obviously my views on Brexit are the same as yours.
Right.
Where there wasn't the queues of people from around the block in this country queuing up to be food pickers and coming this, and there isn't, there's advertisements outside every hospital, nursing home in the country, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Yeah. So, unfortunately, there isn't hundreds of thousands of people from this indigenous population that want to work in that sector.
No.
Like you said, they're more than happy for somebody from Nigeria, India, Philippines, whatever, to look after grandma, granddad, whatever, but they're not prepared to let them bring their own children over.
I wonder whether we'd find anyone who has got a parent or a grandparent or a partner in a home like the ones you've worked in who is in favour of this law, because that's the mad bit about it politically, is that it's easy to imagine people who will be outraged by it, but you're either looking for people who aren't really thinking beyond the fact that here is a stick with which we're going to hit foreigners who want to work here. The idea that someone's sitting there thinking, oh, well, she's wonderful, she looks after my mum, but I don't think she'd be able to have her own family here. I just can't quite imagine that person exists. Outside, the sort of fever dreams of Nigel Farage and some of the other darker corners of our community, that there simply can't be enough people like that to win votes.
I just think, like you said, James, apart from the occasional headbangers that are still out, like I said, it's I love this radio station. I've been off work for a while, been quite poorly, and
I'm sorry to
LBC's I'm back on track now. I'm starting a new job in a week or two, but fantastic. LBC has kept me going, and I just think.
And this is the one. This is the one that made you pick up the phone. Well, don't remember you're among friends. Let's not either of us let our blood pressure get too high over the absolute. I just think the insensible unpleasantness of this story. It's coming up to 10:30. Phone lines are open. 03. You'll struggle to get through, but you can grab the line that Andrew's just vacated. 0345 6060973. I would invite you to have a crack, even from the perspective of support for the idea, at precisely what James Cleverly is trying to do with this. I can't logically see any sense at all in looking at a sector that has 150,000 vacancies and saying to yourself, I know what we should do. We should make that a less attractive job for the cohort of human beings who are currently most likely to fill those vacancies. What is the thinking here? What is the reasoning behind it? And I think Andrew's comments actually have crystallised some of my own thoughts. I think I know why this is happening. It's not pretty, but I think I understand it pretty well. It's just come into focus there while Andrew was talking to us. I think I've got it, and I'll explain it to you after the headlines with Thomas Watts.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 10:34. Listen, I bow to you daily for your insights and your perspicacity, but I do sometimes get a bit puzzled. Quite a few of you describing this as some sort of trap for the Labour Party, who will be compelled to reverse it when they come into power. Why is that a trap? Literally, only deeply stupid and or unpleasant people could possibly be in favour of this policy. I normally put in a slightly tongue-in-cheek apology at this point if that's offended you, because you are deeply stupid and or unpleasant. But do you know what? Get stuffed. If you like this policy, you're disgusting. You're disgusting for one of two reasons. You're disgusting because it is going to make filling vacancies in care homes even harder, or you're disgusting because it's not going to touch the sides of the immigration figures that you claim to care so much about. It's literally just designed to make you feel good at the thought of a mum reluctantly leaving her children behind when she crosses continents to come and look after our elderly. There is no reason to support this policy except callousness or stupidity. And that's just grim. That's just grim. Some of the reactions online were, I mean, close to beautiful, actually, in a poetic sense. This is from a doctor called Ian Overton, who writes, "I'll expect you to feed me, bathe me, brush my hair, hold my hand, recognise me when I have ceased to recognise myself, and be the last human touch I may feel before I die. But I do not think, at the same time, that you deserve a family life." Tanita Tickerham wrote, "How can anyone be proud of tearing the families apart of people who do one of the most undervalued and hardest jobs on the planet? James Cleverly, a true Tory, punishing the poor with a smile on his face." John O'Farrell, who's got a rather splendid new book out, I should tell you. "So they can work for the minimum wage in our care homes, doing jobs no one else wants to do, but they can't go home to their own kids at the end of the day. James, people go into politics to try and make a difference, but usually, capital letters, in a good way." And the always wonderful Adil Ray writes, "Extraordinary that this is posted like it's a brilliant thing. Splitting families. Care for us, but not your kids. A reminder that Cleverly's mother was a nurse from Sierra Leone. Had she arrived now as a carer and had children, she couldn't bring any." It is just extraordinary. 37 minutes after 10. If you're in the sector as an employer, I'd love to hear what you make of this. And if you want to have a crack at telling us why it's a good idea, then 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And I can't do... it's like Groundhog Day. That topic of what are they actually doing? The Tories, who are they actually appealing to? It started when Suella Braverman announced that she wanted to confiscate tents from homeless people. What started? The sense that we can't do the same topic every day. Who the hell are they appealing to? Who is this designed to delight? You know, confiscating tents from homeless people. I told you, didn't I, that I'd explain what I think is going on, and I will do shortly, but let me give you a quick heads up. One of the things that I found most personally and professionally frustrating about covering the carnage in Gaza is the difficulty of getting testimony from within the borders of the Gaza Strip. Journalists not allowed in. Israel very, very strict on who can and can't get into the country from their side, and Egypt little better. So actually getting hold of people, finding people who can tell us what the reality is like, as Benjamin Netanyahu, in defiance of pretty much the entire world, seems determined to press on with a ground offensive in Rafah, knowing what it is like to know that that is coming, is something that has been very hard for me to relay to you, and I'm sorry about that. But I think, all being well and technology permitting, we will be able to speak to a 21-year-old Palestinian-Irish woman shortly after 10:45 today, who has managed to set up an internet connection in our aunt's house, having already fled other parts of Gaza, and she will hopefully be able to give us an idea of what it's like to be at the centre of the story at the moment, the centre of this unfolding tragedy, this absolute horror show. And, you know, probably because it is so horrible, and partly because it is so hard to get people in to tell us what is happening, you could possibly be forgiven for thinking that things were not quite as serious as they seem from glancing or listening to some corners of the British media today. But 'twas ever thus. Back to the care homes, back to the cruelty, back to the breathtaking callousness of James Cleverly. Mo's in Lambeth. Mo, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. First time call here as well.
Welcome.
I kind of want to follow up on Andrew's points and add a bit more to it. Essentially, I feel that this is just a dog whistle to add to the cacophony of dog whistles that we've been experiencing since 2016.
Who are the dogs? Who are the dogs? Who are the people that cheer this? I can normally, even Idiot's Corner is quiet today. I can normally say, look, there's someone over there Where will we house them? But who actually goes, yeah, I'll tell you who we really need to be clamping down on? People looking after our elderly.
Yeah, isn't it? It's bizarre. And just to give you a bit of background, I was in care work in 2016. I've now left. But I remember the morning after the vote and the amount of carers that were expats or overseas carers that simply said, we're just not going to come back. It's another disincentive. And it's another disincentive upon another one that they're faced year after year. And apologies for the crude analogy, but essentially what we saw with the fruit farms, etc., is, capitalists just said, let the fruit rot. Really sorry, but you can't quite do that with the elderly population of this country.
Good point.
These
That's
are
a very
parents,
good point.
Our grandmothers, our grandfathers.
You don't know this, I don't imagine, but there's quite an interesting little story today about the technology being used to pick fruit and about the imminent proliferation of robots who will be able to do the jobs that you describe, and actually that makes your point even more pertinent, doesn't it? Because some far off point in the future we probably will be looked after by robots, but it's very far off. and they are not fruits that will rot in the field in the meantime.
Exactly, and I think also it's a massive gaffe and blunder on their own part, because if you recall Theresa May's government, one of the things she wanted to do was, ironically, the complete opposite end of this is she recognised the struggles within the care sector, and there was that idea floated of elderly people essentially having to release equity to be able to pay for their own care.
Yes.
Now, with the cost of living crisis, inflation, etc., I think what we're going to see is a increasing amount of pensioners and old age people completely losing the dignity towards the end of their life. And the irony of this more so the fact that this is the largest Tory voter base. So it really baffles me.
Whichever way you approach it,
no sense.
Apart from the sort of, I suppose, the people that they think 30p Lee represents, although there aren't really any. The people who will be jumping up and down and claiming this is wonderful. And even I can't seem to find any of them today. It's for that very simple reason that even if you are a massive racist, you probably haven't got a problem with the people who are looking after your mum.
Exactly.
It's that refrain from the morning after the Brexit vote. Oh, I didn't mean you. Oh, I didn't mean you. Someone should have sat James Cleverly down and said, no. When I rail against foreigners, and you're trying to appeal to me as someone who constantly rails against foreigners, I didn't mean care home workers. Why are you clamping down on them? You should be clamping down on all the dodgy ones. To which an honest Home Secretary would have to reply, well, that's not going to make the blindest bit of difference to the overall numbers. So what they've done, I said I'd explain it, because they've conflated all immigration under one umbrella as a net negative. All immigration is bad. They've conflated refugees and asylum seekers with illegal immigrants. Not just conflated. They've turned that Venn diagram into a circle, which is disgusting, objectively disgusting. But what has happened is that they have created enormous vacancies through their own policies. And the only people still supporting them are the people who think that foreigners are the root of all problems in this country. They cannot take their foot off the racism pedal, or the jingoism pedal, or the xenophobia pedal, if you prefer, or simply the anti-immigration pedal. They've bet the house on anti-immigration, which means the vacancies are going to increase, which means that the finger of hatred just moves around now to unemployed British people, which is why Richard Littlejohn in the Daily Mail today, who is, certainly a fading force, but still a fairly reliable weather vane when it comes to where the bile duct will spew up its filth next, the bile duct of British politics. He today is focusing upon the tale of an office cleaner being sacked for eating a sandwich by wondering why she's foreign and the job isn't being done by one of this mythical army of sofa-sitting British people. So the three things go hand in hand. You create enormous vacancies by abolishing freedom of movement and the idiocy of Brexit. But you still have to cling on to the carcass of the idea that immigration is the reason why things in this country are bad, as opposed to one of the reasons why things in this country were much better when freedom of movement was in place. And then the third thing is, well, who the hell are we going to blame for our problems? Whether it's vacancies in care homes, which we have created by making it less attractive to come here, or whether it is a collapse in public services, because largely of staff shortages and, of course, underinvestment undertaken by the same people who are trying to get you to blame foreigners for everything that has gone wrong in your world. So that's the sort of trident, the three-pronged attack of unpleasantness and idiocy. And it means that people like James Cleverly, if they want to be the next leader of the Conservative Party, they have to announce policies that are bad for the country, but good for him. And what is good for him but bad for the country? Clinging to the notion that we need to clamp down on care home workers. But I think he's too stupid to get even that right. I just can't see, and I'll have a little look at Idiot's Corner in a minute. I'll have a look in my inbox. What really beggars belief, this is not Idiot's Corner, this is Albert summing up what I've just taken far too many words to say. What really beggars belief, James, is your naivety in seeking any rationality from James Cleverly. Albert, I'm going to pick you up on that, if I may, because I've been thinking about it quite a lot lately. And the way I would explain it is this. The curse of the patriotic liberal is to want the best for your country to such a strong degree that you believe the best of the people in power, even when they are a veritable cavalcade of cronies and cretins. You want the best for your country, so you have to have a scintilla of hope that the people in power may not be as bad as they appear. It's where the curse of O'Brien comes from. It's where my desperation to find a good Tory comes from. And it's why you have to cling on to the hope that these people may not be as awful as they seem. I've done it with Matt Hancock, I've done it with Rishi Sunak, and I've done it with James Cleverly. And I'm sorry, but I won't change because I am a patriotic liberal. I want the best for my country, which means I have to, at least in the first instance, give the benefit of the doubt to the people in charge and believe / hope that they might want the best for this country too. But James Cleverly proves today that he wants nothing of the sort. He just wants to throw people like his own mother, who came here from Sierra Leone to work as a nurse, under the bus of second-class citizenship.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:51 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's 10:51. The headlines are beginning to coalesce. US moves to block Israeli offensive. 26 of 27 EU countries calling now for an immediate humanitarian pause that would lead to a sustainable ceasefire. You wouldn't know it from most British coverage, but the world is almost united now in its calls for the Israeli government to change its plans to begin a ground offensive in Rafah in the next 3 or 4 weeks, a ground offensive that would essentially see people who've already fled their homes in the north of the territory once again in the sights of the Israeli Defense Force. It's been very hard for me to find people in Gaza to talk to, partly because of the limits on journalism that are imposed upon Western news organisations by the Israeli government. But we took a call yesterday from a young man in Ealing who told us about his sister, and his sister is in Rafah. Shahad Walid is a Palestinian-Irish citizen, Belfast-born, and there to study, in part, because with both her parents, because her dad was teaching at a university, and Shahad Walid joins me now. How are you?
Hello, James.
Hello.
How are you? I'm fine.
Good. Tell me what your life has been like for the last 3 or 4 months, if you would. What's happened to you?
Not very good, actually. We were gonna used to have that bad news. The thing is, I was able to travel to evacuate Gaza since November. I was in touch with the embassy in Tel Aviv, the Irish embassy. What happened that it was not a choice for me after waiting already 2 weeks of the clearance. It was not an option for me to leave my parents behind. They both over 60, dependent, and I need to be with them to take care of them. Especially that we are speaking about a war situation. It was not easy for me to take such a decision. So I choose to stay in Gaza, but I was trying to let them to evacuate with me because they are on medication and they need to be in safer places. But unfortunately, the Israeli authorities informed the Irish embassy that they have rejected my parents' names to be on the list of the clearance to pass borders. And that was actually for no specific reason. The embassy was helpful with us. They have already given them a visas, welcomed them to be in Ireland. They did much effort for that, and I really appreciate what they did so far. The thing is, nothing will be important without the clearance for them to pass borders with me. And we are talking about 4 months of war, 4 months of living a genocide. Things are getting hard and hard, especially in Rafah. After they asked all people to point in Rafah after evacuation from the south. And we are talking about unlivable situations, unlivable circumstances right here, especially for elderly as my parents who need special needs. Like, for example, both of them, their medicine were out of stock. And
what does that mean, Shahad? Because, forgive me for being a little bit crass, but most people listening, if they've run out of medicine, they'll just try a different pharmacy or they'll just phone Boots. What does it mean to your parents when you say they have run out of medicine?
It's not a luxury here to go to a pharmacy and
Clearly.
You didn't find it, so you go to another one, because it's a thing that everyone suffer from. The whole place, you can't find it anywhere. Israel already rejected any aid to enter Gaza for the past 4 months. And for them, the medicine was in stock, now it's out of stock. And we are talking just a tiny example as my parents, but this is a situation for all Palestinians, especially for those who are in need for medicine.
What about other essentials? What about your day-to-day life with regard to food or heating or energy or cooking? What is the day-to-day existence like for you and your parents at the moment?
That's actually not available. It's a luxury that you can't find. If you want a shower, you have to go through a journey to find water and to heat it. Most of the food you can hardly can find it. So day to day, the news did not actually deliver the message as it is. People are really suffering here. And that was actually clear. Israel, from the first day of war, they are telling people no food, no electricity, no water. And what happened? People are still trying to find the tiny needs for them. For us, it's a journey every day to survive and to find a way to survive another day in this genocide.
What does the conversation consist of with regard to the likely imminent ground offensive in Rafah? How do you discuss that? Bearing in mind that for an awful lot of people around you, they've already evacuated other places of refuge on in some cases multiple occasions. But what do you have any idea of where you're supposed to go next in the event of a ground offensive in Rafah itself? And what do people say about it? What is the conversation?
What happened that we have already evacuated the south, in the middle of Gaza at the first weeks of war, as they asked us. So if you ask anyone how many times you have been displaced through these 4 months, I don't think that anyone would tell you less than 5. People are trying to evacuate more than one time in order to seek life. But that would be impossible mission through what we are living today. They gathered all people, 1.5 million people in Rafah, that tiny space that in normal days you can't take more than 100. Leaving them without water, without electricity, without any needs that any human would want. And then they are threatening for invasion. But surprisingly, that when you ask for your family to be in safer place to cross borders, you will get rejection. And that's clearly they want us to live and suffer. They want us to experience pain, and it's clearly a collective punishment.
Because your understanding,
it's not an option for you.
the Irish government has, as you've stressed. I mean, you're Belfast born, but the visas are in place for your parents, and your understanding is that any onwards travel to Ireland, any departure from Rafah, is being blocked by Israel and to an extent Egypt, or not.
Sorry again.
So
what the last thing you say?
Your understanding is that despite your family members, all three of you have leave to travel onwards to Ireland, it's been blocked by Israel and by Egypt.
As the embassy told us, it's a matter of the two countries. As they claimed, it's a local authorities. They believe it's Israel and Egypt, but the rejection came from Israeli authorities. They rejected both, my parents, my mom and dad. But what did after a massive night at Rafah, they targeted houses, people everywhere. I couldn't take it until the morning to take them to the borders. The first place came to my mind was the borders, to be in a safe place.
Yes.
So I knew that their names are not on the list, it's just me, my name. But unconsciously I did it, and we made our way to the borders. The Palestinians were really helpful with us, so to the extent that I've already reached the Egyptian hall. There, they were helpful with my mother, so they accepted her to evacuate with me, but then they rejected my father. And we are talking about a time at 10 p.m., when the most dangerous time to go around in Rafah. But then they asked us, if you wanna to pass, you can pass with your mother right now, but your father are not allowed to. And we have asked why was the reason, but clearly there are no reasons for them. So we have made our way to go back to the house. Our house that are completely, like we say, damaged. My neighborhood was targeted 3 times. We have already made it out alive 3 times during this war. So it was not an option for me to leave my dad leaving behind that night, and I would not think any daughter would let herself to leave her dad, who is on medication and needs her. So
just to be clear, Shahad, your dad couldn't look after himself at the moment. He wouldn't be able to look after himself.
No, it is impossible to do that.
What?
So the thing that. When we came back, we didn't even find a car to deliver us to the house. So after we found one, you can imagine the scene of targeting everywhere, bombs everywhere, explosions everywhere. And we didn't even know if we were made it alive.
I understand.
Sorry for that.
I hesitate to ask you this final question, but I think I should. What happens next? What do you think is going to happen next?
Next, we have informed the embassy of what happened with us at the borders, because they knew all the details about it. And they even sent us a letter that they are responsible of the 3 of us to travel to Ireland, and all of that didn't work. The last thing they have told us that we are waiting for an update. They will push further for the Israeli authorities to accept their names. But still, time is rushing, and I don't know how time I will be able to stay here more. And they don't deal with it as an emergency. Israel don't deal with it as an emergency. They want people they want to separate families. And about the rejection, I'm not talking about Shahad's family only. When we're at the borders, they have already rejected many moms, fathers. They want to separate families. They want the family. If you want to leave Gaza, you have to leave a half. You can't leave it as a unit, and that's what I reject. I want to live as a unit with my parents.
Is there a moment, do you think, when you might leave alone?
I don't think so. I have waited 4 months, but I don't know if because my mother's health after what happened, physically she can't stay here. So if we have a chance to leave, I believe I am forced to. I'm forced to do that, yeah.
And no explanation forthcoming as to why that leave to travel onwards to Ireland has not been respected. We've contacted the Department of Foreign Affairs, the Irish Department of Foreign Affairs, who say they are aware of the case and are providing consular assistance, but they cannot comment on the details of individual cases. Thank you, Shahad. And take care. If you can and you want to, do talk to us again. But obviously you've got bigger priorities than that at the moment. And I wish you all the very, very best, and your parents.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Shahad Walid there speaking to us from Rafah, where she is currently trapped with her two parents, a Palestinian-Irish Belfast-born 21-year-old woman who... I don't know if it's appropriate for me to reflect upon that notion of family separation, given the conversation we've been having all morning about James Cleverly making it government policy here for care home workers to be separated from their families if they want to take up a job in this country. But I think my mind was already there, the thought of having to leave your loved one behind, especially if they couldn't look after themselves. Brutal. It's 11:05.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
8 minutes after 11 is the time. Apologies for being so late to the news then, but I'm sure you understand. Striking up a connection with somebody currently sheltering in Rafah is not well, it should be a little bit more commonplace across the British media, shouldn't it, really? But there are reasons why it is not. I have some breaking news for you. Or we should have a little thing to press, shouldn't we? Another blimmin' by-election. I'm with Brenda. Do you remember Brenda from Bristol? They told her there was going to be a general election and she went, oh no, not another one. That's kind of how I feel now about Tories having to leave Parliament in various shades of disgrace and prompting by-elections as a consequence. The latest is Scott Benton, who you will remember was kind of caught by undercover reporters from the Times offering to sort of help people pretending to be business people in ways that were in contravention of the rules. It was a 35-day suspension that he was issued with for breaching the code of conduct, the parliamentary code of conduct. I think that's the one that Jacob Rees-Mogg and Boris Johnson wanted to get rid of after Owen Paterson was found to have breached it also. Do you know, I touched yesterday on Johnson's friendship with former KGB spy, whose son he put in the House of Lords and who he partied with in Italy for 2 days on his way back from a NATO summit where Vladimir Putin's attempted murder of Sergei and Yulia Skripal was under discussion. And you sort of hear me say those things, or I hear myself say those things, and you sort of go, what? How can that? But there's so much of it. Look back now, here is a Conservative MP facing... probably facing a recall, and therefore the people of Blackpool North having to have another by-election because he broke the parliamentary code of conduct. And it is only a couple of years ago that Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg and various other members of the Daily Telegraph Conservative Party network met at the Garrick Club to launch something called the Save Owen Paterson Society, or words to that effect. And they were determined to get Paterson off the hook for his breach of the parliamentary code with regard to accepting money from companies on whose behalf he subsequently lobbied. And rather than tell him to take his medicine, they tried to actually get the whole rule book ripped up. That was Jacob Rees-Mogg, that model of integrity and self-styled saint of our times, Jacob Rees-Mogg. So this is what should happen. You can appeal, which is what Scott Benton has done, and he has failed. So you're probably looking at another by-election up there. I'm not quite sure on what the timings will be, but I think there are days when it feels like we are all Brenda from Bristol. Just call a flipping general election, would you, man? Honestly, what are you expecting to happen? More policies announcing how you're going to be horrible to foreign workers and render them second-class citizens? There's a second element of this, right? And this is quite important. I told you that there was one Daily Mail columnist using the case of an office cleaner being fired for eating a sandwich to rail against the fact that she's foreign and to ask why aren't British unemployed people stealing sandwiches or cleaning offices or whatever it may be. And leaving aside the obvious idiocy and the very deliberate cynical provocation of that, I have been waiting now for some time to see the attacks upon unemployed people ramp up. Night follows day in this kind of thing. And you are simultaneously dealing with huge vacancies and clamping down ostensibly on foreign workers. So what the hell is going to happen? You're going to have to find someone to blame the vacancies on. If you're a member of or a cheerleader for the governments that have created the vacancies, you need to find somebody else on whom to blame the vacancies. So how many times have you tried to catch a train recently where you've been told there's a driver shortage? I grant you some of that is of a result of either official or unofficial industrial action, i.e. drivers only working the hours that they're contracted to work. So that's a staff shortage. Happened to me on the London Underground this morning. So what are we going to do? How can we possibly blame somebody else for the shortages that our policies have caused? This is the most extraordinary moment, and there's no pleasure whatsoever in having predicted it to the final syllable. Of course it has to happen. Who else can you possibly blame for the fact that the hospitality sector is screaming for staff, the fact that the care sector is screaming for staff, the fact that the health service is screaming for staff, the fact that agriculture is screaming for staff, the entire service sector is screaming for staff. There's a shortage of doctors, a shortage of nurses, a shortage of vets. Everywhere you look, people are screaming for staff. And some of the vacancies, some of the shortages are a direct consequence of government policies. Never mind Brexit, which is obviously a huge part of the problem. Actual government policies designed, as we've seen in the first hour of the programme today, to make it less attractive to come here to do jobs in sectors that are currently screaming out for staff. I'll say that again because even I can't believe it. Government policies designed to make it less likely that people will come here to do jobs in sectors that are currently screaming out for staff. Riddle me that. Go on. Explain that to me. What's the problem you've got there, boss? We've got huge vacancies in this sector. What do you think the Home Secretary is going to do? Make it harder for people to come here and do those jobs. So how do we possibly blame the vacancies on somebody other than us? Client journalists, client columnists, client commentators, Tory cheerleaders, the people that brought you Boris Johnson, the people that brought you Brexit, the people that brought you David Cameron, God forbid, and brought him back, the people that brought you Liz Truss, Kwasi Kwarteng, 30p Lee. How can we possibly blame the problems they've caused on someone other than them? Well, here's your answer. It's all the fault of the unemployed people. In fact, you know what? I rarely bother doing this, but I shall read you the latest dispatch from Florida in the Daily Mail, which one of their prominent columnists routinely publishes. And it is a way in which you see a story about a young woman working in Britain for minimum wage, one presumes, doing a job that you would struggle to fill at the best of times because working as a cleaner is back-breaking work, early morning work. Here he goes. He says, every once in a while, along comes a story which sums up modern Britain in microcosm. So you think for a minute, good God, he's not going to break the habit of a lifetime and actually get cross about an exploited worker, is he? Don't be so stupid. He's cross because the 39-year-old single mother of two from Ecuador, who's been fired for eating a sandwich, is from Ecuador. That's what he's cross about. What do you have to be made of to see a story about someone being treated abominably and think two things? Number one, I've got a problem with her because she's foreign. And number two, should be a feckless, work-shy, lazy Brit doing that job, not a single mother from Ecuador. But there it is. The planet's aligning. Here are the consequences of the anti-immigration bilge that you've been spouting for years. How can we possibly avoid responsibility for those consequences? Excuse me, unemployed people, over here, please. Could you just come over here, please? Paint a massive target on your back and we will start shooting at you instead. Which makes this story extraordinary. The number of benefit claimants that find a job each year has more than halved since 2015, and they think they know why. The Institute for Social and Economic Research has provided the numbers. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation have crunched them. And here is what is happening. Did you know? I'm going to tell you something now that you almost certainly don't know. And if you do know, why didn't you tell me? Did you know that in order to receive your unemployment benefit, in order to receive your universal credit, You must agree to look for work for 35 hours a week. Now, you will be aware, now, unless I've got a book on the go, technically I only work 15. I come on air at 10 and I go home at 1. Technically, obviously, I'm never off duty, constantly working, constantly sniffing out stories for your entertainment and delectation. But 35 hours a week, this is one of the stupidest things I've ever heard. And it's coming under the radar because we were being busy caring about other things. If you are on universal credit, you must agree to look for work for 35 hours a week. And you must accept any job after 4 weeks of employment. Until 2022, you were afforded the dignity of spending 3 months looking for a job that you actually wanted, looking for a role that was similar to the one that you did previously. Did you hear Alan Early and Keithley? He's worked in the care sector for 16 years, had some health problems, going back to work in the care sector in a couple of weeks. He's one of the lucky ones, because under the requirements of universal credit, he would have to take a job flipping burgers or doing anything that they decided he should be doing, regardless of what he was good at, what he had experience of, and what he wanted to do. Under the current regime, those on universal credit must agree to look for work for 35 hours a week and accept any job after 4 weeks of unemployment. Now, it seems to me, and indeed to the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, that what happens now, if you go to what we used to call a job centre, is that the people working there are dedicated so completely to ticking the boxes designed by politicians who don't really care about anything except, quotes, looking tough, end quotes, that they can't actually help people find work. You get sanctions if you don't secure a job fast enough. That was introduced in the autumn statement last November. But as one member of the Joseph Rowntree Foundation puts it, job centres have become factories for large volumes of job applications of varying qualities, which employers are reluctant to wade through. So you turn up at a job centre, and because the person who works there is going to get into bother if you can't prove that you've spent 35 hours looking for work, you just send off 1 million job applications, which the employer is unlikely even to open, because they're arriving in bloody great sacks. This is the worst imaginable example of policy making designed to let politicians say things instead of policy making designed to help politicians fix things. So here is a question for you. What is it like to be unemployed? Okay? To be fully capable of work, but currently not doing any, because it's a question that is a little bit confusing given the state of vacancies in so many sectors. I appreciate geography. Do you know, someone somewhere played the Ghost of Norman Tebbit yesterday, talking about his dad in the 20s or the 30s getting on his bike and finding work, as if the failure of a society to create enough jobs for enough people to do is somehow the fault of the individuals left jobless. It's quite extraordinary. I won't even mention distribution of wealth, but here's what I want. 2 questions. What's it like to be unemployed? What actually happens? How can this be that the number of, it's only about 1 in 5 employers even bother with job centres anymore. So I've got 3 questions for you. What's it like to be unemployed? What good is the job centre to you? That's 2 questions. So what is it like? Talk us through it, because most people don't know. And what I really want is someone honest enough to say, James, do you know what? I used to think that it was all true. I used to read people like Richard Littlejohn in the Daily Mail, and I used to think, yeah, why aren't British unemployed people doing all those jobs? And then I became one of them. And now I'm here to tell you what the truth is, what the reality is. 0345 6060 973. Number 2. What's it like to work in a job centre? You don't have to use your real name. You're probably not allowed to. But this idea that you're too busy implementing the ludicrous, crowd-pleasing policies of daft politicians to actually find people work seems to me to fit almost perfectly with the current iteration of the Tory party. What's your job? Well, on paper, my job is to help people find work. In reality, my job is to make sure that people are abiding by the government's instructions that they spend 35 hours a week looking for work. So question number 1, what's it actually like to be between jobs, to be out of work? Question number 2, what's it like to work in a job centre? 0345 6060 973. And question number 3, you're an employer looking for staff, right? What are you doing? Where'd you go? What do you do? I want to get all 3 angles of this. The job seeker, the employer, the job centre. Just knit those together for me. Together we'll do it. I mean, no one's going to be able to answer all 3 questions. What's it like to be unemployed? What's it like to work in a job centre? And what's it like to need staff? Because I'll tell you something for nothing. The reality you experience will bear no resemblance whatsoever to the one described in the pages of the Daily Mail.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:25. The breaking political news is that Scott Benton MP has lost his appeal against a 35-day suspension after being filmed in a Times investigation offering to lobby ministers and leak confidential information for money. And you'd think to yourself, why on earth would he appeal that? And the answer is Owen Paterson. Owen Paterson had Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg trying to rip up the rule book when he was found to have broken it. But hey-ho, it's all in the book. Let's crack on with today's news, which involves the suggestion that the job centres are not actually helping job seekers. They're simply helping people who want to find work tick all the boxes that need to be ticked to keep people like James Cleverly happy. Lucy's in Cambridge. Lucy, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello.
I was working up until mid-November. I worked as an executive search consultant for more than 20 years. So I was headhunted into my last role,
right?
For which I was being paid £65,000 a year. I had that job for 2.5 months, and then they let me go.
Oh.
So in mid-January, I decided I'd literally run out of money, and I decided, well, I'm going to have to sign on to Universal Credit.
Yes.
I think I'm nearly 58 years old. The last time I signed on was in my 20s. And I signed on in January, and I was told that it takes 5 weeks to find out how much you're going to get paid.
Yes.
I was offered an initial payment to tide me over, which was £300 and something, which I took.
Of course.
And then 5 weeks later, I discovered I had the information through that I was entitled as a single adult with no dependent, children living with me, that I was entitled to the princely sum of £368 a month to live on. But because I'd taken that initial payment of £300 and something,
yes,
it was now actually going to be £338 a month.
Until you paid back the initial payment?
Yes.
Was it not backdated for the 5 weeks where you got nothing?
No.
I don't understand, and I'm sure you don't either.
And I have to say, I went in, so I am required to go in every week to see my job coach at the job centre.
Yes.
And the first thing I have to say is, well, the first time I went in to see her, I said, you're not going to try and, just make me go and work in the chicken factory, are you? Because, that's not what I do. And she said, no, we're here to try and help you get back into work. And, obviously we'll try and get you into something that you're used to doing. She said to me, the second time I saw her, I saw a job on the civil service job site for recruitment. And I said, how much does it pay? And she said, $30,000 a year. And I said, well, I can't really take that because that's not what I'm worth.
Right.
And she said, well, I have to say she's really, really nice and she's really empathetic and I really feel for her. The last time I went in was just after I discovered I was, going to get £338 a month. And I did start to cry in front of her because I was so frustrated. And she looked very uncomfortable, very sympathetic. And she said, I have clients coming in here all the time and I know they're homeless.
Good Lord.
And there's nothing I can do for them. She said, if I could give you money, I would do that. But obviously her hands are tied. And I understand it's not her fault. I understand she's just doing her job. But, the idea that people on Universal Credit are scroungers is so absurd.
Out of that 338, does that accommodation as well? Or is that just living?
No. So this is the other irony, James,
yes,
is that if I was renting, then the benefit system would help me by paying my rent,
yes,
which obviously goes to the landlords,
Yes.
many of whom are MPs, I imagine.
Well,
so the landlord, the MPs do very well out of the benefit system.
Yeah, I mean,
If you're on a mortgage, then there's no help at all other than you can take out a loan from the benefit system, but that is just added onto the debt on your mortgage.
At what point, and forgive me for asking this question, but you must have asked yourself, at what point does the 30 grand a year job become, as it were, irresistible? Because the prospect of continuing on £338 a month indefinitely is inconceivable, is unbearable.
Well, I've decided that I'm actually, to be honest, after my last experience with my last employer, I've decided that working for the man is not for me anymore.
Yes.
I was treated so badly. So I've actually decided to move into job coaching, and I want to work freelancing. So I'm in the process of setting up that as a business, and I'm making good progress. So I think if
but not as a consequence of any help you've received from the system in place to help you find work.
No,
and I'm grateful to you for stressing it's no fault whatsoever of the young woman that you've been dealing with. In fact, I sense that you're proof of the pudding here, that her job isn't really to help you find a job. Her job is just to reassure her superiors, going all the way up to the Department of the Department of Employment, that you have ticked all the boxes that they demand you tick when making these supposedly crowd-pleasing announcements.
Yeah, I really feel bad for her, because I think her job must be so difficult. She just spends her whole day dealing with people who are, on their knees, desperate. I said to her when I first went to see her, look, I'm not going to be coming to see you in 2 or 3 months' time. This is literally a kind of tide me over until I can get back on my feet kind of scenario.
Yes.
And I can't imagine anyone signing on to universal credit and thinking that's a long-term solution.
And yet the rhetoric is now gathering pace, A, that there are loads of people swinging the proverbial lead, and B, that if it wasn't for all them sofa surfers, I know that technically means something a bit different, but it's a felicitous phrase, then we wouldn't need all these foreigners to be cleaning our offices, which is the Line 1 Daily Mail columnist chooses today. Lucy, thank you. I'm a little late for the news. Apologies if you feel unduly curtailed. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
11:36 is the time. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Do you know, I missed this in the first hour, and I apologise. Quite a few of you pointing out that precisely the people to whom James Cleverly is supposedly appealing with his policy to ban care home workers from bringing children with them when they come to work in this country, they're exactly the same people who complain about immigrants sending money home, aren't they? It's not a Venn diagram there, it's a circle. Yeah, why are they allowed to bring their children here? Where are they all going to live? Okay, they have to leave their children back at home. Why are they sending their wages back to their home countries? Why aren't they spending them? Because they've had to leave their children back at home, you wombat. So the search for logic in policies designed to appease racism is often a waste of time. And the same often applies to the poor souls that move into the space vacated by foreigners when the government has succeeded in stopping enough people coming here to fill the amount of vacancies that we have. At that point, the spotlight turns on to unemployed British people, which makes these three questions absolutely crucial. Number one, what's it like to be a job seeker, if that's still the phrase du jour? Number two, what's it like to work in a job centre? And number three, what's it like to be looking for staff at the moment? Because some of the obvious answers seem to elude the simplest brains. Why aren't British people doing that job over there? Answer, because they don't live anywhere near that job over there, or because they cannot do it with their family responsibilities. They can't get on a bus at 4 o'clock in the morning to polish your shoes in a hotel at 6 a.m. You just anyway. Kate's in Gravesend. Kate, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi. I just had to ring in when you started talking about universal credit.
Good.
Actually, because I was a job seeker after the birth of my youngest daughter.
Right.
And basically job hunted for quite a long time, found something, but was in receipt of universal credit.
Yeah.
Within the first week of me having that job, they called me in for a meeting and I couldn't get out of work. And subsequently, they sanctioned me £11 for 21 days.
So Universal Credit called you in for a meeting while you had part-time work, and you couldn't go to the meeting because of the part-time work that you had?
Yes, and they sanctioned me. They took £11 a day for 21 days off my award. I was in absolute financial hardship. It was terrible.
Did anyone explain it to you? I mean, it's not quite... You're not answering... I've asked 3 questions today. You're not answering any of them, but it's a fascinating story nonetheless, Kate. Did anybody...
I felt like I had to ring in.
No, I understand, because your sense of grievance is acute on it. So did anybody explain to you how this had happened? Did you try... I mean, I presume you tried to explain to them.
Yeah. I mean, you have to attend these meetings. That's part and parcel of Universal Credit when you sign on. And I knew that, and you have to go in and accept your commitments and everything else. And it was just this one occasion, and I wrote to them on my portal, and I said, I can't attend, I have to do this work. And straight away it was sanctioned, that amount of money for that period of time. And that only stops the sanction when they've got a new meeting for you, not when you say that you can come in.
And you're available. So it is, again, everything is designed to make people feel that people like you are being treated sufficiently badly. Everything is designed to make your Daily Mail reader go, good. I'm glad they sanctioned you. I'm glad you got to jump through these hoops. I'm glad you got to do all of it. It's quite... But did it... I mean, obviously it shocked you, but...
Yeah, I mean, I had 2 children at home. I was petrified that I wouldn't be able to... I had to make a decision. I had to get more childcare to cover that cost. But what was interesting when I was doing all the research and things into Universal Credit, if you commit benefit fraud, they will give you a hardship loan to help you with that.
I don't know about that. I don't understand that. But
it's on gov.uk. You can see all the information.
No, okay. I just don't. I don't understand the point that you're making. If you commit benefit fraud, they'll give you money.
Yeah, basically.
Right.
But it feels like...
But Kate, come here a minute, all right? I'll have a look at the form. But here's the thing, right? The policy is designed to kick people like you. And other people over there are supposed to be going, yeah, they deserve it. I can't believe she's getting something that I'm not getting. And you're on the radio now saying, no, look over there. There's some benefit frauds getting money. I'm sure, and I will coat myself in sackcloth and ashes and eat 7 slices of humble pie if I've got this wrong. But I'm sure it's more complicated than you allow. If you commit benefit fraud, you do not automatically qualify for a payout from the DWP.
Okay. Well,
would you trust me on that? Well, then, okay, then here's why don't you go out and commit benefit fraud then?
Because you shouldn't do that.
But why not? You're going to get a cheque.
Well, that's not what I would personally do. But
okay. Well, have another look at it, because and you are unintentionally highlighting precisely how these sort of things become government policy. You've been absolutely shabbily treated, but you're convinced that there's someone over there doing something wrong who's getting treated much better than you were for doing something right. It's almost certainly not true. I have to say almost certainly, just in case. But because, of course, they've introduced things that make no sense whatsoever. But I'm pretty sure that is not one of them. And I would have said, if you'd told me this yesterday, I'd have said that can't be true either. But it's true. Job centres have been told to stop referring penniless benefit claimants to food banks because it breaches data privacy law. It doesn't stop an awful lot of organisations referring people to food banks. I don't know if you've ever been to a food bank. I have been to a food bank, obviously not as a user, but as a donor. And when you seek to avail yourself of what is on offer at a food bank, you have to prove your need. And massive majority of cases, you do that with a referral from a GP, from the Citizens Advice Bureau, or indeed from the DWP. So now they've been told you can't give any personal data, even if the person that you're referring wants you to. It makes no sense whatsoever, but instead you'll be given a little slip that has simply got the address of the food bank on it. So you'll get there and they'll say, where's your referral? And they'll say, I haven't got one. So, and again, these are the people that you're being encouraged to attack next, unemployed people. Nicola's in Farnham. Nicola, what would you like to say?
Hi there. Yeah, 2 things really. From the perspective of the job centre, I was actually recently at the job centre interviewing people. I was invited along to a job fair to interview. I was looking to recruit staff. I was told there would be about 6 or 8 people already with appointments to meet me. I got there, none of them were there. But the first thing I did when I walked in, I was handed a personal alarm. So I had to walk around with this alarm in case I was attacked at any point during my interviews at the job centre, which straight away put me on the back foot because I was terrified.
No kidding.
Okay.
Yes.
And then you kind of walk through a door and the door shuts before you can open the other door. And someone said to me, "That's what happens in prison."
Like an airlock. That's how I've witnessed that as well. Actually, I can't remember why.
Yeah, which is terrifying. And from the other perspective, trying to employ people is an absolute nightmare. We've been to the job centre now twice. Once post-COVID, just after COVID, we needed to employ for a big contract. We turned up the job centre to interview. Nobody turned up. And I'm not here to discredit people or anything like that. I'm not saying anything bad about people who go to job centres, but the experiences I've had have been really negative. Went again last week under the same guise that we've got lots of people here for you. We're already lined up to interview you.
What are you looking for?
We employ housekeepers, we employ chefs, we employ gardeners, we employ odd job people. We look after a lot of high-end properties, and we're always looking for good staff.
And how acute are the vacancies now compared to in previous years?
Well, we're just crazy busy. I mean, we could employ more and more people every day. We're very, very busy. We've actually found now another route to employment, and it's using one of the well-known, sort of websites really for recruitment. And we've had a recruitment drive on the last 2 weeks, and already we've employed 12 people and interviewed 12 people.
See, there's going to be a million different things going on here, but the job centre is not. I mean, what the Joseph Rowntree Foundation have said is that the job centre has been, as a consequence of political interference, it's been turned into a place not where they help people find jobs, but where they help politicians say publicly that we're really clamping down on unemployed people. And it helps precisely nobody. It must be a nightmare to work there. And you only popped in for a day and you were traumatised by it. Imagine if that was your daily experience.
I'll never go back, ever. Yeah,
No?
It was awful, really. And again, and I'm not being just unkind to people, but the calibre of people that came for the interview was just ridiculous.
Well, this is. I don't think it's an elephant in the room, but you're right to be uncomfortable saying it. You are describing people that employers would not particularly want to employ, and that is for a whole variety of reasons. But that's the human condition. There are people who. Particularly in public-facing jobs, who are simply not cut out for it. And, of course, the columnist's refrain is, why isn't that person over there doing that job over there? To which you, as an employer, respond by saying, because they can't.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous to say.
I can't send them to somebody. It's all about appearances. And, we do say, when we, even on our ads, we say, you must present properly, you must have a keen eye for detail. We describe exactly what we want because we don't want to waste our time. We're too busy.
No, but that's the point. You see, you're recognising the reality as opposed to the simple numbers. So here are 4 job vacancies and here are 4 unemployed people. I don't know how willfully stupid you have to be to think that that's the problem solved. Oh, look, I found 4 unemployed people. What if you're trying to hire rocket scientists? If this is too difficult for people to understand, Nicola needs people who are possessed of a certain set of skills. And if those 4 unemployed people over there haven't got that particular set of skills, you are not helping her by showing her these 4 unemployed people.
Don't send them. And also, what happens then is you kind of get cross with the people who are at the job centre, because I was told that they have a matching team, a team called a matching team. So they literally look at what I want and they personally look at and I thought, that's even worse. I said, because none of these people match what I want.
No, but they've got to put someone on the list, otherwise they get accused of not having done their job. So it's all about where it starts, where the policy starts. The policy starts with the depiction of unemployed people as being feckless, undeserving and work shy. Therefore, you bring in policies designed to address fecklessness, laziness and work shyness. That does not help employers find staff, and it does not help unemployed people find work. It just helps people like Grant Shapps stand up and claim that they are somehow clamping down on unemployed people compelled to get by on £338 a month. It's just absurd.
They have to do is they have to, even on Indeed, we've noticed they have to apply for these jobs, so they have to tick a box.
Yes, exactly that. Sorry, I'm late for the break. I should have bid you farewell a moment ago. My bad, actually. I'm glad you came back. It just took me by surprise slightly. Bill Browder next, great friend of the programme, as you know, one of the world's leading lights when it comes to both highlighting and crucially suggesting solutions, or at least responses, to Vladimir Putin's murderous tactics, which of course came into sharpest focus this week with the murder of Alexei Navalny, and always worth listening to, never more so than at times like this.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
11:52 is the time. Some breaking news for you. Detectives leading the hunt for Abdul Azadi, who was, of course, wanted over that chemical attack on a mother and her children in Clapham, believe that they have recovered his body from the River Thames. More on that in the next hour. But the breaking news from the Metropolitan Police is that they believe that they have found the body of the fugitive Abdul Azadi, wanted for the chemical attack on a mother and her children in Clapham. Bill Browder is with me. Bill, if you don't know, is a tireless campaigner against Vladimir Putin's murderous kleptocracy, and particularly committed to the notion of imposing meaningful sanctions upon Putin's allies and cronies in the hope of sort of exerting enough pressure upon them to hurt him. But I want to begin, if I may, with a man who we spoke of late last week when the news of Alexei Navalny's murder first broke, Bill, because I think we both fear that it could be the name of Vladimir Kara-Murza that next appears in this sort of context. And I know you've just been at the security conference in Munich, and you've enjoyed some success in signing up foreign ministers to your campaign to help him to get Vladimir freed. But it's the foreign minister who hasn't really joined up that you're most concerned about.
So Vladimir Kara-Murza is the second most important political prisoner in Russia after Alexei Navalny. Vladimir is a dual Russian-British national. He's worked with me over more than a decade to get the Magnitsky Act passed and to get the Russians' assets frozen around the world who have been committing human rights abuses. And the Russians tried to kill him with poison in 2015 and 2017. He went back to Russia in 2022 to protest the war. And he went on CNN, called Putin a war criminal. And 12 hours later, he was arrested and sentenced to 25 years in prison, where he sits today. He is suffering from the after effects of poison. He will die in prison, like Alexei Navalny died in prison, if we don't get him out. And he's a British citizen. And so it's a matter of huge urgency and high priority for me to get out my friend, my colleague, and my ally, Vladimir Kara-Murza. And so I went to the Munich Security Conference, and I signed up for meetings, and I had meetings one-on-ones with a dozen foreign ministers from the EU and other places. And my proposal was very straightforward, which is that this is now the most important political prisoner because Alexei Navalny is dead. He's British. We need to get him out, and he's the guy who could potentially lead Russia if Putin regime falls. And what we need to do is we need to organize one of these what I call bridge of spy swaps, like in that movie where we identify some Russian spies that are held in prison in the West, and we swap them for Vladimir and a few other Russian political prisoners in Russia. And I proposed this idea to foreign ministers from a number of different countries. And one by one, everyone said, I think that's a good idea. We support you. I didn't get anybody who said there was no support for that. The only country that doesn't support it is the United Kingdom, is Britain. And Britain has been very, very stubborn on this issue, saying we don't negotiate on hostages. And which is not true because, of course, it required Richard Ratcliffe, Nazanin's husband, to do a hunger strike for a month in front of the Foreign Office before the British negotiated to free Nazanin. But here this is something that's not even a British situation. It's an international situation in Britain. So here I am basically having to go around and freelance this whole thing with a bunch of other countries who will help. And Britain is going to sit this one out. And I find that just completely unacceptable.
Because these are countries where he is not a citizen.
He's not a citizen of Lithuania.
So they're all going further than his
right, and he is a citizen here.
Yes,
but these guys are going to sit it out. And you know what? If you got a British passport and you get into trouble in a foreign country, good luck to you, because this government's going to do nothing for you.
And this isn't a consequence of treaties or Brexit or other dilutions of that passport's power in the world. This is a direct consequence of political decisions taken by the current government.
This is a policy decision where these guys are absolutely afraid to step out of the policy. And Vladimir Kara-Murza, a British citizen, is going to die if they don't. And I find it shameful and unacceptable that the British government doesn't not just take. Right now, they're taking a backseat. They should be the leader on this thing. They should be outspoken. Yes. They should be organizing the other countries. We should be finding the prisoners in other countries, and we should be organizing the swap. And our foreign secretary should be standing on the edge of that bridge when Vladimir Kara-Murza comes across that bridge when we get him out.
The other foreign leaders, particularly European ones, have also been fairly forthright in calling for sanctions on the Russian regime, on cronies or allies of Vladimir Putin. Alexei Navalny's death focuses the mind, as you have attested already, on the $300 billion worth of Russian central bank reserves that are currently frozen. What's the legal situation on that? I mean, what would be the legal response? Or I mean, would Western governments be entirely within their rights to confiscate that?
Absolutely. So Russia has created $1 trillion of damage to Ukraine. We currently hold $300 billion of Russian central bank reserves. Putin broke it. He should fix it. There's a thing called the law on countermeasures, which justifies the confiscation of that money. It just requires some political will. And here I think the government is actually a bit better than they are on the Kara-Murza situation. They're going to. Cameron has been pushing for this. The United States is pushing for this. The bottleneck is the EU. I think that now with the Navalny murder, everybody should pass whatever accompanying legislation there is to clarify any outstanding legal issues. Each one of those pieces of legislation should be called the Navalny Act. And this does two things. It helps Ukraine in a moment of desperate need for ammunition and funding. And it also is two fingers in the eye for Putin. And this is really important. And if we call it the Navalny Act, then we have a great...
doubly, doesn't it? Rhetorically and financially.
Exactly.
It's been 2 years almost at the end of this week since that full invasion was begun by Putin. I mean, this could have happened at any point in the last 2 years. Where do you derive your hope that it might happen in the next one?
Because the Navalny murder really is beyond the pale. Everybody is scrambling to try to figure out an appropriate response. And it can't be just like sanctioning 20 people. Of course, we can sanction 20 people, but that if we do that would be such an inappropriate response. And Putin will be laughing and saying, okay, who's next? Who should I kill next? It might be me next. Putin needs to see that like really bad stuff happens if you kill the most important political prisoner in Russia.
So they're two separate proposals, really, aren't they, which could both carry the name of Alexei Navalny. I know that Joseph Borrell, the EU's chief diplomat, has suggested that the whole regime of sanctions could be called the Navalny regime, but this you're specifically addressing the $300 billion worth of central bank reserves, which could...
and let me say something about that Borrell thing. That's the Magnitsky Act. He doesn't need to change the name of the Magnitsky Act. That would be completely inappropriate. What, we're going to just like forget about Sergei Magnitsky? No. Yes. We confiscate the money. We call that the Navalny Act for Borrell, who, by the way, when he was being introduced as foreign policy chief, he had never even heard of the Magnitsky case. This guy shouldn't be like eliminating Sergei Magnitsky's memory from their human rights Magnitsky Act.
No, you're absolutely right. It's an entirely unnecessary intervention, and yet we welcome the EU's moves to impose a new batch of sanctions. Hungary's opposition has been removed, I think, so they press forward with that.
Well, let's see. Yes. Hungary may not want to rear their head in this particular moment.
How big an issue is the proximity of the current iteration of the Conservative Party to Russian plutocrats in London for your cause or for the bigger picture in general?
I think that everybody who is connected to the Russians has run for the hills and pretending they never had met a Russian in their entire life. It's not popular here in the UK right now to have had any connection to the Russians. Of course, we know that there were many people who did. There are members of the House of Lords who, one in particular, who was out lobbying for Oleg Deripaska to get him taken off the sanctions list. And this particular member of the House of Lords got a $5 million bonus when he got his companies off the sanctions list. But right now, everybody is kind of laying low.
They're in abeyance at the moment, so it isn't an issue. You don't think that the hand of the British government is anyway stayed by the sources of some of the donations they've received over the last 10 years? Or?
No, I mean, they're being very disloyal donees.
Yes, I suppose there comes a point where the quid pro quo, the quo disappears, however much quid there may be. I suppose. Bill, good luck. It's always interesting to talk to you. I won't say a pleasure, because I wish that your mission was over, and the call for these things. There must be a little bit of you that feels. I mean, you keep warning about what is likely to happen next, and then it happens. There must be a little bit of you that is downcast by days like last.
I'm totally demoralized by the murder of Alexei Navalny. It's just the most horrible thing. He was a friend, he was a colleague, he was an ally, and he was somebody that I really liked and respected and admired. And for him to be no longer with us, I'm still having a hard time processing the fact that he's killed.
Mm. And finally, just one little thing I don't fully understand. How can people like Vladimir Kara-Murza be subject to British government policy on hostage negotiations? He's not unlike Jimmy Lai, on whose behalf you also campaigned, and whose son Sebastian has been in that chair many times. If you're being held prisoner by a foreign regime, how can that have the same sort of status in the eyes of the Foreign Office as being held hostage by a terrorist group or a rogue regime?
The Foreign Office doesn't want to help the people held hostage by terrorists or by governments. Right. They just don't want to get involved. And so if you get unjustly detained as a British citizen, you're really out of luck. You know, if you had a French passport or an American passport, your government would come and protect you. But if you're British, forget about it. And that policy should change. And I think that I'm going to push on both the Conservative and the Labour government to change that policy.
Bill Browder, tireless campaigner, it's almost an understatement, but responsible for the Magnitsky Act now being introduced in many, many territories, and it's fair to say the scourge of the Kremlin. I'm sorry for your loss, Bill, as well. Thank you. It's 4 minutes after 12. I've been riding roughshod, even by my standards, over the junctions and the times today. I promise I shall do better in the final hour of the programme.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 8 minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We should be kinder to the law firm, perhaps. There is a law firm called Devonshire's where enormous sums of cash routinely swill around with gay abandon. And it was a woman working as a cleaner at that top city law firm who was subsequently fired for eating a leftover tuna sandwich from a discarded platter. However, as is often the case in these matters, the cleaning contract is outsourced, and it is the company to which it is outsourced who took the decision to fire this woman. The company is called Total Clean, and let's begin with their statement. While we would not typically comment on personnel issues, we would like to address the misleading and inaccurate information that is being alleged by our ex-employee. It is important to us to maintain the integrity of our workforce and service by ensuring we deal appropriately with any actions that undermine the hard work and reputation of our incredible team who conduct themselves impeccably. A spokesman for the solicitors has said Devonshire's did not make a formal complaint against Gabriella and expressly told Total Clean not to take any action against her. Total Clean carried out their own investigation, and the decision to dismiss Gabriella was taken without any input or influence from Devonshire's whatsoever. So somewhere between those two positions, no doubt, lies the truth. And Gabriella, that Gabriella referred to there, is Gabriella Rodriguez, who hails from Ecuador and had been working as a cleaner at the offices of Devonshire's solicitors for 2 years. She was sacked for taking, quote, client property without authority or reasonable excuse. A case has been taken up by the United Voices of the World Union, which exists exclusively to protect foreign workers from workplace exploitation. And I have just realised that, contrary to my best efforts to make every day on this programme sound like a complete chaos, you could make a case for arguing that all three of our main topics this morning are in some way linked. Yeah, you can see a pattern here if you look hard enough, because James Cleverly's decision to ban foreign care workers from bringing dependents to this country, telling them, in other words, you can come and care for our family, but you must stop caring for your own in order to do so. That could be filed under exploitation of foreign workers. The second conversation about unemployment and the unfitness for purpose of an entire system designed essentially to feed red meat to idiots. It kind of sums up Britain at the moment, doesn't it? A system designed to feed red meat to idiots who lack the ability even to digest red meat. But that in some ways was about the exploitation of the workforce, albeit with particular pertinence to the unemployed. And then this one very specifically looks at the question of workplace treatment. I don't know if you've been watching any of the miners' strike documentary on BBC Two. There's a whole series running. It's extraordinary. It is extraordinary. There are so many instances in British history that, if they were taught properly in British schools, would probably bring about some fairly serious social change. The miners' strike is not a black and white issue, although Margaret Thatcher behaved at times inhumanly. Arthur Scargill's narcissism was also a huge contributor to the plight of the miners, but the way they turned brother against brother has rarely been told quite as powerfully as it is in that documentary. And it reminded me of a bygone era, an era I barely lived in, when you could rely upon a trade union to protect you from the worst excesses of an exploitative employer. And it normally kicks in if you find yourself being fired. There are still a few. Unions are, Mick Lynch, look at the effort, look at the shift he puts in on behalf of his members, despite, of course, the deliberate demonisation and even denigration that's inflicted upon him by right-wing media. Right-wing media in this country, incidentally, led the charge against stripping workers of union protection in many cases. So the search for patterns is irresistible sometimes, but I don't really want to get into the politics of this today. I remember the first time you told me that when you worked in a call centre, you had to put your hand up to ask permission to go to the lavatory. You couldn't just leave your station and go for a wee. And being fired for eating a sandwich, I think maybe a couple of years ago, when I was trying too hard to be balanced, I might have had a conversation about whether this was justified or not. Well, I mean, technically it's theft, but forget about it. Honestly, it's just stupid and disgusting to fire someone for eating a sandwich. The sandwiches, there are often sandwiches lying around here. I get a little bit cross about it, frankly, because I think it might tempt vermin. But there's often platters of sandwiches lying around here. I get sent quite a lot of stuff, as you can probably imagine. Most recently, I got sent some sprouts, which oddly, none of my colleagues wanted to share with me. I offered a full stick of sprouts all around the office. But I've also been sent cakes. I get sent quite a lot of cakes. I get sent biscuits. What did I get sent recently? I got sent some chocolate bars. I get sent all sorts of delicious snacks. I got some lovely stuff off that baker's. What's that Scandinavian sounding baker's called? They sent us some strudels. What's it called? Anyway, I hope I said thank you at the time. I get sent quite a lot of free stuff. Not as much as I used to, frankly, which I hope anybody listening in that sort of sector will take as a challenge. I got sent some delicious Santagur blue cheese the other day. In fact, they were the same people that sent me the sprouts, because if you get Ole and Steen, thank you, Ole and Steen, they sent us some lovely strudels, and I just leave them in a public space in the office, and I say, help yourselves to this, because that's how I roll. That's the kind of guy I am. It does depend slightly on if it's super desirable. It may just slide into my rucksack unmolested. But generally speaking, if someone sends me 2 cakes, I'm going to leave at least one of them out for the troops to devour. Now, what this story made me think was, very simply, what would happen if one of the cleaning staff here at Global Towers help themselves to a cake? Listen, I'm not asking for a flipping biscuit or anything like this, but I have on occasion said to whoever was on shift that day, do you fancy a slice of cake? I've been sent this for free. It wouldn't cross my mind to distinguish between different levels of staff when saying you can have a slice of cake or you can have a sandwich. Now, there's a slight difference here because the idiot's corner, Russell. Straight. So now you justify theft. Well done, Russell. Seriously, stay away from scissors. So there's a slight difference here, given that the sandwiches have been laid out for a meeting and the meeting is over, to which my response would be, well, if you want to keep the sandwiches, what do you do? How do you clean a sandwich, Russell? How do you clean a sandwich? What do you do? Give it a little dust? Can you use furniture polish on a sandwich? Just give it a spray and then give it a little polish? Or do you leave them uncleaned? Do you leave a big pile of sandwiches on the middle of the table in the room? Or do you go and put them somewhere else, like in a kitchenette or on a table somewhere? The idea that you could be punished for eating a sandwich in a room that has been left full of uneaten sandwiches and you are paid to clean is clearly, unless you're Russell, clearly absolutely laughable. Absolutely laughable. But that's not what I really want to talk about today, because because frankly, you end up bumping into people like Russell, and nobody wants to bump into anybody like Russell. What I want to talk about today is the thing that happened to you at work, and I'm going to break the habit of a lifetime. I'm going to let you go back No, I don't really want you to go back too far. The more recent it is, the better. I'm not breaking the habit of a lifetime. The more recent it is, the better. But 0345 6060 973 is the number you need to tell me the story about what, because of the balance of power in the workplace, in the post-unionised era for most workers, the thing that happened to you at work that was so wrong and so exploitative. I don't want to move into the realms of sexual abuse or criminality. I just want to look at something that would fit on the same page as being sacked for eating a sandwich or being told that you had to put your hand up to go to the toilet. In a moment, I will tell you about the time I was accused of stealing from my employer because he had spied on my underpants. Have I ever told you that story? A special prize for anyone who can, if you already know the story of how I was once accused of stealing from my employer because the manager had spied on my underpants. I mean, that was an extraordinary experience. And I think if I'd been a bit older and I'd had trade union protection, I probably would have raised a grievance. But what I want from you is the story that proves how easy it is to treat workers. In fact, you know what I'm going to do? I am going to quote the company, or rather the trade union concern. I'm going to quote United Voices of the World, which has described the incident as proof that many employers treat their cleaners like the dirt they clean. So that's what we want. The time when your employer treated you like dirt, and probably there was absolutely nothing you could do about it. 0345 6060 973. Now, I'm not making light of your plight, but I do want this to be a combination of no and also blimey. In other words, well, you get the picture. It's like, you know, this poor woman, I hope she gets her job back, but I'm sure they'll find somewhere else for her to work if she doesn't. And do you see what I mean? Not like, you know, I lost an arm at work, but I was treated with so little dignity that it still smarts now. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. It's 12:19.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
22 minutes after 12. The story moved off the front pages because the police were fairly confident that the fugitive for whom they were searching had perished in the River Thames. Charlotte Lynch is at Tower Pier for LBC to bring us up to date on the believed fate of Abdul Azadi, the man that was wanted with regard to the chemical attack upon a mother and two children in Clapham. Charlotte, what do we know?
James, police have recovered a body that they suspect to be that of Abdul Azadi. They'd been searching for him for more than a week after announcing on Friday, the 9th of February, that they believed he had gone into the River Thames immediately after the attack on the night of the attack, which was on the 31st of January. So almost 3 weeks to the day. And they believe because of the distinct clothing he was wearing and items that officers found on him when they recovered this body, yesterday afternoon. They strongly believe it to be Abdul Azadi. Now, formal identification hasn't yet taken place. Of course, this body has been in the Thames for around 3 weeks. So they say, of course, it is very difficult. They're working with the coroner to come up with a way to formally identify him. But detectives who have been working on this case since the start have analysed the discovery, and they do strongly believe it was Abdul Azadi. They say they're in contact with his family, and they have informed them of the news. But he was believed to have gone in the water just a few hours after the attack on the 31st of January, of course, evading police capture for around 4 hours after the attack, navigating the London Underground system with a huge wound to the left-hand side of his face, which it looked as though he himself had sustained in that attack, eventually walking to Chelsea Bridge, where officers concluded that was his fate because they could see him on CCTV leaning over the railings, and then he suddenly disappeared from view. And now we have this discovery. Officers working on this case, they do strongly believe that they have found the body of Abdul Azadi.
Charlotte Lynch, many thanks indeed. Live, as I said, from Tower Pier in southwest London. It is 24 minutes in South London, 24 minutes after 12. Altogether different tone next. These are serious stories that hopefully you can smile about now. That's quite a good way of putting it. Of course, you may not be able to. You may still be livid. James writes, Paul, I was doing shift work on a 24/7 system. The boss came in at night and said there were too many of us, so he put me on mornings. I went home and came in the following day, not the following morning. He fired me because he expected me to come back the same day. I sounded quite naive, apparently, the other day when I mentioned that I'd been in a restaurant, a chain restaurant, and witnessed the manageress telling one of the chefs to go home because they had too many staff there. And I said to one of his colleagues, will he still get paid for this shift? And they said, no, he'll just get paid for the hours that he's done. And I said, but he's come into work expecting to do a full shift. And if they've made a mistake on the rota, or they're not as busy as they expected to be, it shouldn't be him that pays that. It's the person who keeps the profits that takes the risk of not making as much money as they. But apparently that was normal play. I could be wrong. Joe's in Forest Hill. Joe, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Joe.
So I spoke to you at the height of lockdown. I was working for a supermarket at one of the online distribution centres. Height of lockdown, just asking for simple stuff like gloves and face masks and, the basic stuff.
Yeah.
And I got sacked.
On the spot?
Yeah.
You must have kicked off a bit.
I mean, no, just basically asking for my own personal, health and safety
PPE.
items, basically. But it was funny because that day you was having a discussion about this kind of people's rights, and especially during lockdown, how companies are taking advantage of people, kind of desperate to get out of the house or just do anything other than being locked in, basically. And a lot of us, I was self-employed at that time as an Uber driver. I'd had to get a job just to kind of get by because I was one of the many millions who fell down that grey hole where nobody helped us. And I was just listening to you talking about the guy checking your pants or whatever the case is. It just reminds me of that because there was times where we was scrutinised to next levels where it got a bit silly.
It's a combination of things. There needs to be a little bit of culture in place, but you can also be desperately unlucky with the individuals that you find yourself working under, can't you? Yeah, and it can be a right old. The jobs are almost too kind for them. It can just be someone who revels in the petty exercise of power over another human being.
Yeah, well, we was asking, working in chillers, so imagine it's like 4 degrees all day long.
Yeah.
They was making us share chiller jackets. So at the height of lockdown, they was expecting people to share coats and stuff, and, we was told, if you don't like it, you can go home. So I took the opportunity to go home. If you don't want to look after me, I'm going to look after myself.
I get it. The short answer is if you don't like it, someone else will do it. And that, unfortunately, is the platform upon which centuries of exploitation have been built. It's only the sort of second half of the 20th century when they started turning some of the tide back on that in favour of the workers. But then Margaret Thatcher got elected. 12:27 is the time. Matthew's in Dalston. Matthew, what happened to you?
Well, just first of all,
It's very a pleasure to speak to you, James. I've
Likewise.
listened to you most days for a long, long time, and you're great.
Mate. Thank you.
But basically, that's all right, mate. Basically, it's 2011, and blah, 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 make it short. I used to work front of house in places like catering and all like that, but I was trying to stay on my feet in London, so I got a sort of chefing job in a sort of pub chain all around London, and there's a new head chef come in. I've only been there about 4 or 5 months, but got on with all the other chefs, Algerians, Jamaicans, English, whatever. We had a good time. But this new head chef didn't really like me, and he said the sort of rule, no food. So I just went one before my shift.
No eating.
Yeah. So, sort of no food. Like if you can have a steak or chicken burger, what's fair enough, and things like that.
Yeah.
So I just bought some chicken from outside. You know, in Sainsbury's, you get the thighs or the drumsticks.
Yeah.
I bought some of them, and I got took a big tomato, took 3 slices, and sort of put it with the chicken. Yeah. And I got sacked.
For stealing 3 slices of tomato?
Yeah. 3 slices of tomato. Yeah, they sacked me. Yeah.
Now, listen, if I were to be the devil's advocate, I would point out that rules are rules. And it doesn't matter whether you'd stolen 3 chickens or 3 slices of tomato. The fact was, you know and I know. You can stop laughing. I'm being a serious lawyer.
I know.
Stop it. Sit down, my lad. You know and I know that if that chef had liked you, he wouldn't have fired you.
Exactly. But he didn't like me. Because I just asked for like Sundays off and stuff like that, and he didn't like it, and he was a bit weird, and you know. And then he just got a bit silly. I just couldn't be bothered to speak to him. Do you know what I mean?
No, I do. 3 slices of tomato, eh?
3 slices of tomato, James.
Do you reckon if it had just been 1 slice, 1 big slice, rather than 3 little slices, you might still be there now?
I don't know. I think they're just looking for something. Do you know what I mean? I think they're just looking. Obviously, they're looking for something. But I took it to they said you can, you can go against it. So I went
appeal it.
So I appealed it in another pub, and then with the head sort of chefs and the people who owned it, and they upheld it. Do you know what I mean? So
I love it. Thank you. That's 3 slices of tomato. It's 12:30 is the time. All right, here's a killer for you. When filming Evita years ago, writes Nick, I was doing security for Madonna. She accused me in front of everyone of in her trailer. I was so embarrassed I didn't want to go back to work. And I'll tell you what Madonna accused Nick of after the very latest headlines with Tim Humphrey.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
12:34 is the time. When filming Evita years ago, I told you I'd reveal what Nick had been accused of, although he still insists that he was not guilty of the offence. When I was filming Evita years ago, doing security for Madonna, she accused me in front of everyone of peeing on her toilet seat in her trailer. I was so embarrassed I didn't want to go back to work. I didn't do it, by the way, still protesting his innocence. From the, shall we say, rather silly to the deadly serious now, because as you have heard in our news bulletins, the former editor-in-chief of WikiLeaks, Julian Assange, is facing a last-ditch legal bid against extradition to the United States of America. Alan Rossbridger, of course, was editor-in-chief of the Guardian newspaper when they began collaborating with Julian Assange, and he's been following proceedings in court this morning. 2 questions really for you, Alan. The first, quite obviously, is what is happening in court at the moment. And the second is this story. I mean, for people like you, it has a huge significance, but it hasn't captured the imagination of the British media in the way that perhaps one might expect it to, given what it says about freedom of expression and even up to and including protection of sources.
Yes, well, so what's been happening in court, his QC has been making out the case for why he shouldn't be extradited. He's saying he's being prosecuted under the Espionage Act, and he's saying espionage is a politically motivated act, and that's excluded from any extradition treaty. And he's also saying, of course, that what he did wasn't espionage. It was more journalistic than espionage. So that's the beginning of a 2-day hearing. Why should people care, or why has there been muted support? I think partly Assange is his own worst enemy and has made a lot of journalists don't consider him a bona fide journalist. I think it's also because of the fact that if he is extradited, he will serve time in America, and Brits don't really see the relevance of that. I think they're wrong. I think the moment you start carting people off to jail for espionage who clearly aren't involved in espionage, that's a very dangerous thing. But that probably explains why people have been a bit muted.
Well, precedent as well, I suppose, should be weighed against the muting of the story, because if they can do it to him, then they can do it to others in cases that perhaps won't be as nuanced or as complex.
Well, I like to think of it the other way around. Suppose you had an American journalist based in London who was looking at, I don't know, India's secret nuclear program. Imagine the Indian government trying to extradite an American journalist to serve time in an Indian prison because they broke the Indian official secrets law. Yeah. It would never happen. I mean, the Americans would never allow it to happen. And the Australian government is now pretty much united in saying just send him back to Australia. So this is clearly a political trial, a political act, and I very much hope the court rejects it.
Do you think they will, if that's not a silly question?
I have no idea.
No.
It's been through two courts so far, and it's gone one way each time.
And it could go to Strasbourg after this. That could halt his review.
I think it's almost bound to.
Right.
I think this creeping use of whether it's the Espionage Act or our own Official Secrets Act against revealing bits of the state that the state would rather wasn't out in the open is a very dangerous precedent.
You've been pretty clear about your personal feelings regarding Julian Assange as a consequence of your dealings with him. I suppose the key issue here and the point that you're making is that the case should transcend all of that. But just a quick word, if you would, on why your own feelings towards him have moved around a bit.
Well, he's a prickly character. Yeah. He has a way of falling out, even with the people who most want to support him. And it's no secret that we fell out in our handling of the material that we published. I've always said we'll stand behind that material. So he is his own worst enemy. But I think you have to put all that aside and look at the principle.
And care less about his character, more about the importance of what's actually happening. What sort of shape is he in court, Alan?
Well, he was given permission to attend court today. Remember, he's been in Belmarsh high security prison for the last 5 years. But the judge began by saying that he was not feeling well today, and so he didn't actually turn up in court today.
And concluding tomorrow, Alan Rusbridger, former editor-in-chief of The Guardian newspaper, who was, of course, in the chair for that collaboration, that famous collaboration with Julian Assange, who is appealing against, it's his last-ditch or penultimate-ditch legal bid against extradition to the United States. Thank you, Alan. So it's just coming up to 12:40. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, veering back from the serious to the slightly silly. I like this from Rob. It's not quite up there with, let's man the barricades and down tools and come out in solidarity with Rob's son. But I don't know, it does seem quite zeitgeisty. My son, James, made the mistake of using that old joke when he was asked what his secret was for being such a good salesman by someone that he managed. My son said, I could tell you, but I'd have to kill you. I beg your pardon. My son said, I could tell you, but I'd have to shoot you. The man in question then put in a complaint saying that with all the shootings in America, it was not appropriate to make such jokes. My son was disciplined by the company and had to issue an apology to his colleague. Is the world going mad, asks Rob in Glasgow, or is it me? I don't know, Rob. Actually, it could be a little bit of both, but it does sound to me like a little bit excessive. It's not quite what we're looking for, though. Nor was the Madonna story, although I sound so ungrateful sometimes. They're both brilliant stories. It's the thing that happened to you at work, the act disciplining you for completely unfair or exploitative, but just made you feel temporarily Victorian. I can't believe I got told off for that. And I'm touched by the fact that at least 3 people have heard the story before, or at least they remember the story of me being accused of stealing from my employer as a consequence of my manager spying on my underpants. I'll give you a clue. It involves a ladder. Joe's in Hendon. Joe, what would you like to say?
Good afternoon, James.
Hello, Joe.
Thanks for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
I'm a big fan of yours.
Thank you, mate. What's going on? What happened?
So, pretty same situation, actually, with this young woman who got the sack. Last year, I got the sack from the prison service. I was employed by them for 5 years. And it was a particular occasion where they were celebrating Black History Month, and the kitchens allowed extra sandwiches to go onto the wings for the inmates.
Right.
And on this event, we had outside governors visiting the prison, and there was this one particular governor who worked within this establishment who just always had it out for me. He was in charge of taking around the visitors, and there I was feeling a bit peckish, and one of the inmates gave me a sandwich. It's a big no-no in the prison service.
Well, of course it is.
Yeah, and...
it could have anything in it. It could be full of pubes.
I hope not, mate, no. But, he just made an example out of me there and then. I was totally unaware of his presence at the time. And,
so you took a sandwich off a prisoner, which was an act of good faith from a prisoner who liked you. He saw it and he fired you on the spot.
Well, pretty much it led to an investigation, and by that point I was so demoralised.
I know you were, but I mean, don't make me side with the guy. You shouldn't eat sandwiches made by prisoners. They could be poison in it or anything.
It was just a cheese sandwich. We barely had any cheese in it.
You didn't know that, did you, when you ate it? But 5 years service counts for nothing in the face of one relatively minor misdemeanour like that. It's not fair at all, is it, really, is the point that you're making? Are you all right now? You're back on your feet? Did you find other work?
Unfortunately not. No, I'm unemployed. To be honest with you, it's something which is just...
It's knocked you back, hasn't it? I can tell.
It has.
I can tell. Well, don't let him exercise agency over the rest of your life just by dint of having spoilt that bit of it. Seriously, sounds like a plum. Take care, Joe. I like this, Vinny. I'm going to slightly rewrite what you've written. This is a message for Nick. You should have said to Madonna, "Don't cry for pee in your trailer." Do you get it? They were filming Evita. Don't cry for pee in your trailer. No, I thought that was really. I don't know why I bother. Danny's in Barnstable. Danny, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, mate.
I used to work for a recruitment agency, construction recruitment, and one of our clients used to do big supermarket refurbs.
Right.
And we had one labourer guy that used to go all over London for us. They used to ask for him by name. He was brilliant, and it's hard to get really good, reliable labourers in the industry. So one day, during one of the fit-outs, they said, can you get the freezer? There was a freezer they was getting rid of in the supermarket, full of all the freezer and contents. Had to go in the skip. So two of them picked up the freezer, chucked it in the skip. When it went in the skip, they took a lolly out and ate the lolly, and they both got sacked for eating the lolly.
Why were they chucking out the lollies?
I don't know. I just suppose they just said get rid of the whole lot.
It's all gone a bit literal. This. I was looking for stories that were little. No, all I've got is people eating things at work. I've got 3 slices of tomato, a cheese sandwich, and 2 iced lollies. It feels like I'm playing My Grandmother Went to Market, and all she bought was 3 slices of tomato, 2 iced lollies, and a cheese sandwich that didn't have much cheese in it. Everyone's taking it too literally, Danny. I wanted stories about the time my boss spied on my underpants and accused me of stealing from the company.
Didn't you get away with that one because the ones that went missing didn't have skid marks in?
There's no need for that sort of language on this programme. Honestly, no, that's not what happened. I was up a ladder in the stockroom. And again, like a lot of the callers today, the boss had already taken an inexplicable dislike to me. Don't go there. It was inexplicable. An inexplicable dislike to me. And he noticed that the label on my underpants was a River Island label. And I was working at River Island at the time. And he went to the purchase ledger. God, what an absolute git. He went to that was close, Keith. He went to the purchase ledger where you recorded your staff purchases and established that I hadn't bought any underpants on my staff discount in the 3 or 4 months that I'd been working at River Island. And he accused me of stealing them. He actually called me into the office, sat me down, and with a straight face and a witness, who was very much on my side, but obviously couldn't say so at the time, accused me of stealing these underpants. They were silk, actually. And when I said I got them for Christmas off my mum last Christmas, before I even started working for River Island, he actually went to the trouble of establishing whether or not that particular line of underpants, undercrackers, silk boxer shorts, had been for sale at River Island at the Christmas I said I'd got them from my mum for. So after you've had an experience like that, how do you go back to work feeling enthused? This is the thing I don't understand about managers like that. Is that, unless he's trying to get rid of you because he doesn't like you, because you talk posh. I think that was part of the problem. And and then replace you with someone who he doesn't have a problem with and he will be nice to. That, I suppose there's a form of management where that might work. But what a bizarre thing to do, to accuse someone of stealing from their employer because you had been literally spying on their underpants. That's extraordinary. I haven't told you that story for at least 5 years.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
10 to 1 is the time. Speaking of dodgy and possibly nefarious behaviour, we're talking about people being punished for doing relatively trivial things. I'm not going to lie to you, it's gone a bit literal. We began with a story of a cleaner being fired for eating a sandwich. I was hoping to get more stories about having to put your hand up to ask for permission to go to the toilet, or an exploitative employer treating you appallingly. All I've really managed to land is stories about people eating things that seemed relatively trivial and losing their jobs as a consequence. But that is upon me as a second-rate presenter. What is the converse of this topic? What's the opposite of this topic? People not being fired for quite serious misdemeanours. Which brings me to Kemi Badenoch, who is in the news, as you'll be aware, rather more at the moment than she was when this happened.
Maybe he should get off Twitter and actually listen to what I'm saying.
10 years ago, I hacked into, oh my God, hacked into a Labour MP's website. And I changed all the stuff in there to say nice things about Tories.
We didn't need the bit at the beginning. The bit, is it too hard to... that's extraordinary. I remember when that happened at the time. I think she was relatively unknown. Those were the days. But that's extraordinary. She hacked into, I think it later emerged that it was Harriet Harman's website, which I'm pretty sure is illegal. But anyway, she's lecturing everybody else now on how they should and should not behave. Let's go to Ian, who is in Beckenham. Ian, does this involve eating something that you weren't supposed to eat?
James, no, but I have laughed at many of those along the way. This ended up being actually quite serious for completely innocuous reasons. And this is back in the day I was on a jury, on jury duty, and sat on a case. Some are serious, these cases, but many really aren't.
Yeah.
And we were confronted by an individual who worked in a bar, and he stood accused of a shocking crime of having been offered a drink by a client in the pub, and he declined the drink, but he took the money for it.
Yeah.
So he took £2, and he put it on top of the till, which is really quite normal. This was witnessed by an undercover security officer for the brewery, so believe it or not, they'd actually fund someone to look at doing this. Then he saw the money go into the guy's pocket at the end of service. So he called the police and accused this individual of theft for £2. Yeah. So this, as you can imagine, then becomes a massive amount of expenditure.
Well, to get to court, that's tens of thousands of pounds.
Oh, yeah, I think we reckoned it was about 35 grand for this poor individual to stand there and plead not guilty. And we as a jury were confronted by all of this evidence. And we just sat there gobsmacked for £2.
Are you allowed to tell me what the finding was by you and your fellow...
Yeah, it was absolutely not guilty. And there was a gentleman in...
So that's terrible. So, I mean, that's traumatic as well, not just the loss of the job, but, you know, the fear and the stress of a...
Yeah, and the pursuit of him.
A criminal investigation and a pursuit.
Relentless madness at the expense of taxpayers' money. He was absolutely found not guilty. And there was a guy I was quite young at the time, and this gentleman stood up and said, and he goes, I'm not finding this man guilty for £2 ever in my life, and I've got to go pick my kids up from school. So if you want to, you're more than welcome.
So he just exempted himself from the rest of the deliberations. That's how I tell you what, that would have done for Henry Fonda, wouldn't it? If someone had done that, that whole film would have turned out differently. Thank you, Ian. This is quite interesting, you know. We'll talk about this tomorrow, I imagine, and I would not be enormously shocked if colleagues get stuck into it later today. Prince William has, I would say, intervened in matters Middle Eastern. He is calling essentially for a ceasefire in Gaza. He says Too many have been killed. I, like so many others, want to see an end to the fighting as soon as possible. Not obviously calling for a ceasefire, but certainly expressing an opinion. There is a desperate need for humanitarian support to Gaza. It's critical that aid gets in and the hostages are released. Sometimes it is only when faced with the sheer scale of human suffering that the importance of permanent peace is brought home. Even in the darkest hour, we must not succumb to the counsel of despair. I continue to cling to the hope that a brighter future can be found, and I refuse to give up on that. The statement began with the lines, I remain deeply concerned about the terrible human cost of the conflict in the Middle East since the Hamas terrorist attack on 7th of October. I mean, he hasn't said much, but he has said rather more than perhaps is traditional. We will perhaps consider that a little more tomorrow. That's almost it from me for today. Kaylee is here, but I don't know. Oh, no, 56. I thought it said 58. I must clean my lenses. Kaylee, what would you like to say? In Glemsford. Where's Glemsford?
It's near Sudbury in Suffolk.
Of course it is. What would you like to say? What happened to you?
So I hope this meets your criteria of not being
so do I,
literal.
frankly. It's been very poor so far.
I'm a teacher, trained as a secondary school teacher, but I did a little stint in primary school.
Yeah.
And I had a year 5 class and we were teaching space. And it was our first lesson, and we'd been instructed by our senior leadership team to make the first lesson about the shape of planets and that planets are spherical in shape.
Yes.
I had quite a bright class, and within 2 minutes they got it. Like, I had one child say, oh, it's a circle. And I was like, oh, it's like a pancake, is it? And they were like, oh, no, it's a sphere. So literally I had 40 minutes to kill with a class of 9 and 10-year-olds about planets are spheres. And they just started asking me lots of questions about space, and my colleague had already put a video into the PowerPoint we were using that had names of the planets on and stuff so we could introduce the topic. The deputy head came round on a learning walk and saw that I was answering all these questions and, was trying to pull it back to, and what shape are the planets? Oh, they're spheres, okay. 2 days later, I was pulled into a meeting with the deputy head and the executive head for all the primary schools in the Multi-Academies Trust and accused of misconduct for going beyond the lesson objectives and not just extending that planets as
You were disciplined for teaching children too much.
Apparently so, yeah.
I love that. Was it upheld? Did you get into bother? Did it go on your record?
It didn't go on anything. I think it was a bit dodgy anyway. I think there's a bit of context. They were trying to put a target on the back of the experienced teachers, and I'm top of the pay scale, and they were trying to save money in places. So
this is kind of what I meant about often these things happen because you have been targeted rather than it wouldn't happen to another colleague who was doing exactly the same thing. It's a bit like getting fired from a radio station, Kaylee.
Yeah, and the week before I had a meeting with the deputy head, and I'd had a book look and met every single target. I'd done everything right, really kept my head down and kept everything as good as I possibly could, because I knew that they were targeting expensive members of staff, and they got me on this really ridiculous thing. So I just went off sick and just didn't go back again and got paid for the rest of the term.
And the moral of the story is teach children less in future than they need to know, not more. I'm just reading that it looks like Alexei Navalny's widow has had her Twitter account, or X if you prefer, suspended, which, I don't know, already quite a lot of questions hanging over Elon Musk's attitudes towards the Kremlin, but there's another one for the time being. If you missed any of today's show, it's quite busy, wasn't it? You can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, which is, of course, the official LBC app, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. Download it now for free from your app store, or just head over to globalplayer.com. Tom Sawbrick with you at 4 on LBC, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.